from the excellent camera work that we did this evening with respect to the arrival of U.S. President Barack Obama. Lots of interesting shots that we got there, including that exclusive one as Air Force One flew into JKIA. That we'll be talking about for days in the camera room. But congratulations to our cameramen. We've got our panelists here: Ken Kambona, an international development consultant; Mustafa Ali, conflict transformation expert, as well as Atieno Ndomo, a governance analyst. We've been speaking about what's been happening, and or rather what the agenda should be for Kenya with respect to our bilateral relationship and the Global Entrepreneurship Summit. But this can't escape attention, especially because a few minutes past 8 o'clock we all saw it. President Barack Obama coming down those steps of Air Force One, greeting Uhuru Kenyatta, but absent was the deputy president. Why, Atieno?
I think it probably was the wise decision. I think that probably it was wiser that the deputy president either chose not to be there, or a decision was made for him not to be there, because I think there would have been a moment of awkwardness, which really wasn't necessary. It probably would have clouded this whole moment. So I think very wise decision in the circumstances.
Yeah, let's not dwell on that too much. Actually, let's speak now about the agenda with respect to the United States. Ken, what has the United States agenda since Obama took power been for Kenya and for Africa?
The most important thing that Obama has had in mind is that of trade and investment. Out of the normal development agendas that have been happening, Obama has had this feeling that Africa is ripe for business. Kenya, for instance, is the country that within this region is ready for taking up serious business, serious American investment. And so when you see Obama land, this evening, you'll see all the corporate America people that he will be having in his entourage. We've already seen a lot of them coming before and discussing things. So the most important thing that he should get out of this place with is, how is Kenya well positioned to absorb that U.S. investment, which at the moment we are really not as prepared.
And in fact, a lot of people have been commenting about this with respect to how we'll absorb this kind of investment. You talk about a company like General Electric, you talk about Walmart, the big names in the United States coming and making investments in Africa, and the companies that perhaps would perform the same kind of services for the public here in Kenya and here in Africa cannot compare in terms of capital, in terms of expertise. What is that thing that's going to be able to transform or spark growth of the next General Electric here, the next Walmart, that's African-owned, African-driven?
Yeah, and that's the agenda that he's setting. So apart from the investment bit of it, there is the technology transfer that has been factored into the trade and investment initiative that Obama has for Africa. You've heard of Trade Africa and Power Africa. So to have trade, you need a value chain approach. You need to have goods or commodities processed locally, and then you take them in a packaged manner to the US market. Now to do that, you need power, you need energy, and that energy is the component that we call Power Africa. So Power, 60 million homesteads in Africa, add a 30,000 megawatt capacity for the African continent. Kenya will take 5% of 5,000 megawatts of that. And with that, you can now be ready for the American market, because you must process things 24/7. You must have contracts that are valued by both sides, and that is the bit that when it comes out of this country, we must, as a country, make sure we have signed as a government, then incorporate the private sector.
And taking on debt, for instance, Africa has been the continent that has suffered in terms of repayment of debt to the West, in terms of servicing loans and debt at the expense perhaps of its own development. What kind of debt should we be looking to acquire? What kind of investment should we be looking to acquire in order to retain our own interest, not harm our own interest in the long term?
Fortunately, the American government has agencies which really support investments of American companies in developing countries or emerging markets for that matter. Organizations like Overseas Private Investment Company have actually worked here. I think companies like Wananchi Group, CBA Bank have benefited from that, so that you don't quite need to take, you know, loans the way we know it, but you are supported technologically. So for instance, I think the Commercial Bank of Africa has been able to run M-Pesa very effectively, and M-Shwari. All this mobile banking has been as a result of U.S. investment, and you can see it working. So such things are what we now need, that America puts part of its money onto corporate America, so that corporate America comes here and then doesn't leave the corporate Kenya just to struggle with loans, but supports corporate Kenya in technology transfer, and then, you know, with time corporate Kenya will come up. And it's not just the big companies. We talked about the small person, the mama mboga. How do we support that? And the big thing is, you must make them export ready. And to make somebody export ready is that, how does the American market operate? If you're taking something like a shirt, what is the American style? Or even a sweatshirt, you know, whatever it is. Shoes, what is the American style? So once you train the people here on how best the American market operates, then you will have this, you know, duty-free, tariff-free market, which is over, you know, 6,400 goods that we can take there without taxation. So I think those are very important. And if you see some of the areas that are going to be discussed bilaterally, taxation is one of them. Of course, visa, because for Kenyans to trade with America,
they have to travel there.
They have to travel there. Yes. Then the issue of direct flights. You must travel there to know your customer, to know your client. Yeah. And these are things that I think by the time we come out of here, let Kenya just say it as the Americans say it. What is in our best interest? Yeah. Americans will not seize they're not shy to say that. They'll say what is in our best interest. And what I think is in our best interest is to sign and firmly follow up what we have just talked about.
All right, Mustafa, what is in our best interest when we come to the fight against terrorism, which is going to be a huge agenda for U.S. President Barack Obama and Uhuru Kenyatta? What specifically is the nuance? What at the granular level, what should we be looking for in terms of the agreements that we make bilaterally between the United States and Kenya?
Yeah, John, it's very difficult to actually disconnect Kenyan interest and the U.S. interest in terms of the fight against violent extremism and terrorism. But what we can say that Kenya is a frontline state. The United States of America is not. And therefore, Kenya has got to take a lead and agree with the United States of America to fight terrorism on Kenyan terms. So this means that Kenyans should not be dragged into aspects or strategy that goes beyond the region. Yes, terrorism is global, and we are dealing now with issues to do with the ISIS, with Al-Qaeda, of course, Boko Haram, and all that expanding across the country. And therefore, there are a lot of interconnection, but there are issues here, there are nuances that we need to address. But talking about Obama here, he is a president. When he came to power, he took over power from Bush, when the economy in America was basically in tatters. And he said it, I think, a few months ago, that he has ended 2 wars, and America's economy is on the rebound. In fact, that is rebounding. Now, for Kenya, we need to find ways that we are going to address terrorism, violent extremism, and at the same time ensure that our the various economic sectors that have come under extreme stress because of terrorism are taken care of.
Perhaps that's the cut and paste strategy that we've had with respect to terrorism, cutting and pasting what was for a long time an American strategy in how to fight terror, using a hammer in almost all respects. And that seems to be the approach that we're taking now, especially if you see the trends in terms of the growth of radicalization in different places. What is it that we can learn from the United States experience under Barack Obama in terms of reducing, first of all, the military and security footprint with respect to this fight against terrorism?
Yeah, and just going back to, I recall Dick Cheney one time saying that they never and will never talk or negotiate with evil. At that time, implying the Taliban.
Yeah.
But what Barack Obama has done in Afghanistan, actually, in the context of ending the war there, they've actually been talking to the Taliban in Doha, in Qatar. So in many ways trying to find all avenues, various approaches, not just exclusively military, to address the issue of violent extremism. Now we need to do the same, and I think this government has started doing that. The amnesty that was declared by His Excellency President Uhuru Kenyatta, inviting these young people, including those who are duped into joining Al-Shabaab and other militant groups, that seems to be working, but it needs to be done in a more systematic manner.
And support for that would come in what way and what form from the United States?
I think one is training. That has to be done. The war on terror has got to be intelligence-led, and therefore training on intelligence gathering and analysis and acting on that intelligence. The military on their own cannot just deal with this war.
Yeah.
They have to depend on the intelligence, and that's really where the support, I hope the Kenyan government is really going to be focusing on that, on the intelligence support, training, and making sure that our intelligence institutions are robust and are supported to make sure that they're able to do this work and lead this fight against terrorism and violent extremism.
Atieno, we've been talking about wish lists. Everybody has a wish list with respect to what they want from the United States, from the Global Entrepreneurship Summit. Now, because Barack Obama is the focus, at least for this evening, what would you want to see once he leaves, either being implemented or either having been signed between Kenya, and in terms of the bilateral relationship, yes, but more so in terms of perhaps the more fundamental changes that happen here?
Good question, because I think that I want us to be very critical about this. So there's a sentimental, exciting part where Barack Obama is one of us, and we all really are proud, we're very inspired by him.
Yeah.
But then he's here as the president of the U.S. And I think a lot of people recognize now there's like almost another scramble for Africa. So if you think about the Africa Rising narrative, which is really the reality that most of our economies are on an upward trajectory. A lot of potential. If you think about the demographic dividend, a lot of people talk about this. We're the only continent where our population is still growing. It means there's a lot of promise and there's a lot of potential. But alongside that is also still really long-standing issues of governance, which are basic. We're sitting here, Burundi, I think, today has coronated a guy who's supposed to be a young man who has decided it doesn't matter whether his country goes down the drain, whether he kills people, he's hanging on to power. And who are the people who are cheering him on? Our own East African community, which is currently chaired by Kenya.
If not cheering him on, but being silent in terms of
I would go as far as saying cheering him on, because who's the guy who's presiding over the so-called mediation? Third term, these are wars that Kenyans and Africans have won, where we're saying we have term limits. You cannot rule for life. But we have all around us now people who want to rule for life because they think they're indispensable. If they die, their countries will, this kind of delusion. So my point is, there's a scramble for Africa because there's a lot of promise. But Africa will not benefit if we don't deal with these basic governance questions. So it's all well and good to think about all these companies have descended upon us. But if we don't have the basics right, think about the contracts that will emerge. Are they going to safeguard the Kenyan interest, or is it going to be about the American interest? So in that respect, Barack Obama is sitting here looking out for America. Who is going to look out for Kenya? This, for me, is the challenge. And that's where we have to go back and say, as Kenyans, as much as this represents a moment of so much promise, it takes us back to the basics. What happened to our constitution? How do we elect? Who governs us? Who's looking out for Kenya? Because unless we get that right, we will remain where we are.
And the fundamentals need to be discussed, at least at the level of being able to bring that change and take advantage of this moment to be able to ensure that that change continues for the next 50 years, especially if this is indeed the scramble for Africa, the new scramble.
And we cannot, therefore, you can't roll back. You can't go back to the scenario where you're told term limits are up for debate. I am scared. I am seeing we all lauded Kagame, but Kagame has now turned around and said Rwanda can go nowhere without him. Burundi is doing the same. Our next door neighbor, Museveni, has no intentions of going anywhere. So other than Tanzania, where they seem to have a respect for, that you hand over power.
For transition.
If we don't watch out, even as for Kenyans, let's not think that the things you put in our constitution can be rolled back. So we have to, the vigilance has to continue. We have to continue fighting, and this is our fight to fight. Let's use this moment of promise to say, what are we going to do as Kenyans to make sure that the battles that we have won, that we never go back?
that our interests continue to be represented by the people who are at the Global Entrepreneurship Summit and who are also leading those bilateral discussions between the United States and Kenya. Of course, a very important weekend for Kenya with U.S. President Barack Obama having touched down, probably now meeting with some people or going back to his hotel prior to the Global Entrepreneurship Summit that he will be hosting tomorrow alongside Uhuru Kenyatta. Keep it KTN. We are going to be discussing the nitty-gritty, the details of what exactly we need to be getting out of this. What is Kenya's interest? What is Africa's interest?